My name is Cameron Nichols, and today I'm going to be talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. On November 20th, Kennedy announced, "I have today been informed by Chairman Khrushchev that all the IL-28 bombers in Cuba will be removed in the next 30 days. I have this afternoon informed the Secretary of Defense to lift our naval quarantine." Subsequently, the United States disarmed several of its obsolete air and missiles in Turkey. On October 16, 1962, President John F. Kennedy received information from the National Security Advisor, the NSA, McGeorge Bundy, regarding the Soviets' MRBMs, or medium range ballistic missiles. They had just placed them in Cuba. In addition to the naval blockage, preparations for an all-out military action included a massive airstrike followed by a naval attack. The U.S. response to the crisis was a product of the president using XCOM as a way of information through the Soviet Union to Cuba. In short, the nature and direction of the policy response during the Cuban Missile Crisis was determined by the Kennedy presidency, while allies included OAS and NATO were only informed about the U.S. policy. Hence, it was a gesture of diplomatic courtesy on part of the Kennedy administration, nothing more. Concerning the role of the Congress of the United States of America, the Congress had no part or policy inside the making of the foreign policy. I'd like to show this political cartoon by Sterling Parker. It shows Putin and Kennedy together inside an arm wrestle. It's supposed to show how they're fighting, but they're not actually doing an arm wrestle. They're just fighting politically. It's supposed to be a metaphor. Now I'd like to move on to how it could have been stopped. And more about why it happened. Sunday morning, October 14th, was the most cloudless day that they had had so far by the Florida coast. And the U-2 flight got some good pictures that over the next few days were analyzed and reanalyzed, of missiles in Cuba. That the Soviet Union was installing medium-range nuclear weapons in Castro's Cuba, capable of striking down major U.S. cities and killing tens of millions of people, Americans, within minutes. Faced with the dramatic demonstration, President John F. Kennedy immediately decided that the missiles would have to be removed. Throughout the 1962, the movement of the Soviet personnel and equipment to Cuba had aroused suspicion in the American intelligence community. Despite Kennedy's warnings, the Soviets continued to construct bases inside Cuba, and the United States continued to monitor the activities and take pictures. Meanwhile, Kennedy met on October 18th for several hours with the Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Yermolov, who stressed that the Soviet Union's weapons in Cuba were by no means offensive. Kennedy read Yermolov and received a statement that warned against offensive missiles in Cuba. Again, the world stood still for 50 years in this last week before the war ended. Through October 7th, through October 1st through the 12th, and then to October 20th through the 28th. The most dangerous moment through all these 2 weeks were was the 27th of October when the U.S. destroyers enforced the quarantine around Cuba and were dropping depth charges on the Soviet submarines, according to the Soviet accounts reported by the National Security Archive submarine containers, and were rattled enough to talk about firing nuclear torpedoes whose 15-kiloton explosive yields approximately the bomb of the devastation station of Hiroshima at August 1945. This means that the bomb dropped at Hiroshima in 1945 is that torpedo would be about 3 times the size of that bomb at Hiroshima. Next, I'd like to show this article from the Washington Post, where Kennedy orders the blockade of Cuba as Red builds nuclear bases threat the U.S. will sink the defended Army ships. So, what this means is that Kennedy had pretty much enough with them building bases inside Cuba, and he said, if you guys do not destroy and stop building more bases, we will invade Cuba. A reported decision to assemble a nuclear torpedo for battle readiness was aborted at the last minute by Captain Vasil Arpizho, who may have saved the world from a nuclear war. A reported decision to assemble a nuclear... As XCOM meetings were drawing to a close at 6 p.m. on the 26th of October, a letter arrived from the Prime Minister of Khrushchev, directed to President Kennedy. This letter stated that the UN would stop putting more nuclear missiles and building bases in Cuba if the United States agreed to not invade Cuba. The next day at 10 p.m., the president again turned on the second tape and started recording on national live TV and said that if they agreed to take down all of the nuclear defenses and bases inside Cuba, that they would not invade. And my last thing I'd like to show is when the war ended. The missile crisis officially ended on the 28th of October. The outcome was not obscure that the evening in the special CBS News broadcast, Charles Collingwood reported that the world had come from under the most terrible threat of the nuclear holocaust since the Second World War, with a humiliating defeat for the Soviet Union. I'd like to thank Google, and I'd like to share the websites that I found all this information on. The first website is archives.gov. The second website is www.theguardian.com, which is an article website. And the last one is a journalist website. That's www.foreignpolicyjournal.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.